Ladies and gentlemen.
Hello and welcome to the Not in the Curriculum podcast. My name is Christy Fuller and today I am joined by none other than Mark Manning, an outstanding educator himself. Mark, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us about your educational journey so far.
Christy, thanks for having me on the pod. So excited to be here. I've been looking at your numbers and they keep going up. So it's awesome to be a part of something that's exploding in popularity. My name's Mark Manning. I've been teaching for 23 years, about to start my 24th year, all in the Ferguson fluorescent community. And I'm excited to be here to talk about how we can make things better for kids.
I'm all about that, Mark. Thanks for sharing some of your educational background. I myself have been teaching for 18 years this year, and while some people would say I am an older teacher, I prefer the word veteran.
Air quotes.
Air quotes. I'm an elementary school teacher. I've taught in Hazelwood and Rittner school districts. I've taught 2nd through 5th grades, and I've spent my teaching career serving students in the St. Louis area. I'm passionate about closing the achievement gap, which brings us to our topic today, the achievement gap and equality in schools. Today, I'd like to discuss that perhaps it's not actually an achievement gap, but rather an educational debt.
What is educational debt? Elaborate on that. I've only ever heard of achievement gap.
Sure, Mark, I'm so glad you asked. So Gloria Ladson-Billings, in her 2000 presidential address to the American Educational Research Association, has stated that the achievement gap is actually an education debt. She compares the two to the national deficit versus the national debt. The deficit refers to the amount of spending by the government that exceeds income over a certain period of time. This would be the achievement gap. The national debt, however, is the sum of all previously incurred annual federal deficits, all of the debt that the government owes.
So I kind of know where the financial debt might have come from. How in the world could an educational debt have been caused?
Well, she also goes on to explain and elaborate that the debt is cumulative of 4 other types of debt: historical, economic, socio-political, and moral debt. The historical debt refers to the centuries of oppression and injustice that has taken place toward minorities, and for our purposes of today, the educational equalities as a result. Minorities were expected to assimilate into American culture and leave their languages and customs behind. Economic debt has occurred in the areas of job opportunities for minorities, oppression that has kept them from gaining generational wealth, and is also seen today in the ways that school districts are funded. Unfortunately, it's just facts that school districts who serve predominantly white students often have more revenue that allows them to provide more resources, better facilities, and more experienced teachers compared to their counterparts that are serving more minorities. The social political debt refers to the degree to which communities of color are excluded from the civic process, which limits their ability to express themselves in the decision-making process that would ensure that their children receive quality education. And then finally, the big bummer, the moral debt, which is the hardest to explain or come to terms with as educators. The moral debt reflects the disparity between what we know is right and what we actually do. And by the time the nation woke up and recognized the moral debt, generations of minorities have been left behind and now need to catch up. It's unfair and not right.
You're blowing my mind. I've never heard of any of this phrased this way before. I know what I can do when I'm in debt and I have to pay it back. Has there been anything done or some ways the United States has tried to address this kind of debt?
There have been, actually, Mark. A few things that come quickly to mind are affirmative action, which is supposed to level the playing field for minorities in getting jobs and college educations, but what it actually did was help white women more than minorities. We also have the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. But I think the one thing that everyone thought would fix education for all and the inequalities is the Supreme Court case of Brown versus the Board of Education. They thought that results of this case would have a significant impact on equalizing education for all. The case of Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954 finally overturned the separate but equal notion and declared that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. Brown was only the beginning of the struggle to end discrimination in education, and many states sought and succeeded to find loopholes to avoid following the court's order at all. In fact, it was not until the 1970s, almost 20 years later, when the courts finally intervened. I know, right? When the courts finally intervened to uphold the decision in Brown. And instead of this case ending the deal of segregation, it just further promoted school inequalities.
This seems like a tiny baby Band-Aid on a gaping, bleeding wound. It's a huge, huge problem. What are some ways that people like you and I or other teachers might be able to specifically address this debt?
I'm glad you asked, because that's my goal today, is I want to communicate with teachers how they can address this debt in their classrooms, because corporately it seems overwhelming, but if we focus on the students that have been placed in our classrooms, we can really make a huge difference. So teachers could do these things. They need to become the best, most effective teachers for their students in order to provide an equal education for all. By combining best practices with high expectations and holding students accountable for those high expectations, students can begin to show signs of closing the achievement gap. Educators can also provide for students in high poverty areas. This may seem simple, but it's really effective. You can provide things like medical care, free or reduced lunches, school supplies. And while these things might seem an easy fix, they really aren't. When you provide basic needs for students, it allows them not to worry about how those needs will be met, and instead they can focus on learning. Another way is that schools can become community schools, places for resources for the neighborhood they serve. Adult classes, laundry service, GED classes, ELL classes are all ways to meet community needs. And I think a really big one is getting parents involved. When you get parents involved in student learning, that is closely connected to student growth. Our school hosts free family fun nights, and we do it once a month. And building those relationships with families makes home and school connections so much stronger. Well, thanks for listening to me ramble on and on, Mark. It's time to get off my soapbox. Sure. I hear that your topic is tied in closely with equality as well.
Yeah, in fact, you touched on it during the first half of our discussion today. You were affirming the historical truth that minorities have been expected to assimilate into American culture and leave their languages and customs behind. Nowhere is that more true than in the history of American schools. I have to ask, though, how much of this do you think still exists in 2025, assimilation into this broader, air quotes, American culture? What would you guess?
That's a really profound thought. You would think that we have left behind assimilation by now, but I think there definitely are some aspects of assimilation that still take place. Like when immigrants come to our country, like they need to learn English to be successful in school and how to be an American citizen. I think that allowing students to honor the culture and language can be represented in the classroom, and that is really up to the educators in those classrooms to ensure that all voices and cultures are here. How about you, Mark? Do you see assimilation still taking place?
I do. But first, I have a quick question. What do you wear to school when you teach?
Jeans.
Jeans.
T-shirt.
Every day?
Every day, and sometimes a hoodie.
I wear all black every single day. Your uniform is jeans and a t-shirt, and my uniform is all black every single day, to the point where my principal told me once I look like a ninja, which I asked him to never say again. But
I don't find you as silent as a ninja, though, Mark.
I can be. After 2 decades of work among some of the finest Americans anyone would ever hope to find, the students and the parents of the Ferguson-Florissant School District, I can testify that assimilation is still an expectation of American schools in 2025. And even though both of us are demonstrating probably some of our privilege in being able to wear uniforms every single day, because no one other than my principal's offhanded comments ever told us what we're supposed to wear when we teach necessarily, I am particularly galled by the idea of mandatory school uniforms in public schools. Now, a little bit about Ferguson-Florissant and school districts like it. These are some of the most impoverished folks in St. Louis metro area. In fact, so many of our students qualified for free and reduced lunch that approximately 8 years ago, they stopped asking us to apply, and now everybody in the school gets free and reduced lunch. Working with families in their community, I know Some of our football players don't even have enough money to buy pairs of socks. They'll come to practice with their toes sticking through them. But yet and still, our school board in their infinite wisdom decided that these are the types of families that should be required to purchase 2 separate sets of clothing, because no one's going to wear their school uniform to the mall, would you?
No, absolutely
not at all. So the uniforms that I have to buy as compelled by my school district are not going to be the same clothes I would wear otherwise. I have trouble making ends meet. And so obviously on a day-to-day basis, this is the type of adversity that we're talking about for our kids. And given the amount of adversity that our kids already face on a daily basis in schools, why do you think our district or any other who services our type of kiddo would want to focus on their clothes? Is this actually going to help? Make a case for me. Convince me.
I don't think I can. I've got nothing. I can't convince you. You make a very valid argument.
Well, we did some research on our own in preparation for today's pod, and what we had found is that the history of mandatory school uniforms goes all the way back to London, England, and they were the first charitable schools who would take in students that didn't have fathers or didn't have money, and they would actually supply those uniforms. And then if you fast forward and cross the Atlantic, mandatory school uniforms have been something that common schools and boarding schools have been used to oppress and repress Native Americans, African Americans, women, Hispanics that they encountered here, and it continues on all the way to this day. In fact, when Bill Clinton gave his State of the Union address in 1996 and first suggested school uniforms as a way to, quote, keep our kids safe in light of recent violence that had been occurring in American schools, that was the impetus for many schools across the nation that work predominantly with folks of color, folks from an impoverished background, to adopt a school uniform policy. But yet and still, in 2022, it was now cited by our own U.S. government that the need for school uniforms is to, quote, limit distractions. None of this makes any sense to me whatsoever.
I agree with you. That doesn't make sense to me at all. So do you have any solutions that you think will be more effective than school uniforms?
It's hard to say. I don't think there's any one solution that will wrap up everything for everybody. But when it comes to education, what I always think about is to start at the root. Whatever you're trying to fix for kids has metastasized long after pre-K, K1, 2, the early grades. All of our major issues in American education have root causes, and oftentimes by the time they get to the level that I teach at, we're dealing with stage 4 issues and sticking some polo shirts and khaki pants on kids hoping to fix their safety or their distractibility or their culture or their self-esteem. By then, that's just chemo for problems that are already going to be fatal. So whatever issues that those proponents of school uniforms would hope to address in American education, they have to start before kindergarten. And then by the time those kids get to middle school, where you are teaching, and high school as well, those problems might be settled by then.
Well, that is a lot to think about. And I think that we've covered a lot of topics today about where inequality in our classrooms began at the very beginning of our nation, and we even focused on one specific area of inequalities. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for tuning in today and listening to our podcast. We want to thank our sponsor, Miss Moneybaggs.
Moneybaggs! Ching, ching!
Ching, ching! And her charitable contributions via her olive oil company, Monopoly. Join us next time when we explore the long-range impact of standardized testing in American schools. This has been Christy Fuller and
Mark Manning
for Not in the Curriculum Podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Bye-bye.
Bye.